SAGES Stories.
Welcome to today's episode of SAGES Stories, the official podcast of SAGES, the Society of American Gastrointestinal and Endoscopic Surgeons. Please make sure to hit the like button and subscribe so you can stay up to date with our most recent episode. And enjoy the show.
Welcome to episode 26 of SAGES Stories, where we shine the light on some of SAGES' most impactful leaders. I'm your co-host, Dr. Kevin El-Hayek from Cleveland, Ohio. And today represents a fairly big moment in SAGES Stories podcast history as we usher in a new era. Sadly, Dr. Sharon Tofai has rotated off as the original co-founder and co-host of the podcast. And I really want to start by publicly thanking her for all her work and for joining me to make the podcast what it is today. And while I know that our listeners may be saddened by that news, today's episode is all about the transition to a new season. And in that light, I'm joined by a very familiar voice as guest co-host.
Well, hello, everybody. This is Archana Ramaswamy coming to you from sunny, it's always sunny here, Southern California. I know you thought I was going to say Cleveland, but it's Southern California. I'm very happy to guest co-host for today's episode with Kevin.
And I mean, we needed someone West Coast for sure. You moved, and we're going to hear about that in a little bit. But I initially had you down as Minnesota, so you were a little closer to us for quite a while. But as we navigated this transition, Archana, you were the obvious choice to step in as a guest co-host, as you've really been a part of this podcast from its inception. Of course, our astute listeners will remember you from such episodes as the classic episode with Jake Greenberg, number 7. And for anyone who hasn't checked that out, I would encourage you to do so, and I'll make sure we have a link in the show notes. But in addition to the fact that you were a guest on the podcast, many listeners may not know that you were involved in the creation and really gave the green light for this to even exist when you were chair of the communications committee. So in large part, a lot to thank you about that. And of course, without Sharon, we would be lost to not have another hernia expert leading the charge.
Well, I mean, it's always about hernias, right?
You either make them or we fix them. It's one or the other in surgery. So this is going to play fairly prominently as we introduce today's guest as well. But before we do that, maybe you can give us a little quick update on what's happened in your life since you were featured on SAGES Stories in 2022, 2 years ago.
Well, thank you, Kevin. It doesn't feel like it's been that long, but at the same time, it feels like it's been an eternity. So I have moved to Southern California, as you noted before, and left the beautiful lakes and greenery of Minnesota to come to a place that's sunny almost all the time. It's been an exciting transition, and trying to learn what all I can grow here. It's a lot of stops and starts, and some things do amazingly and some other things take a little bit of work. I've also moved to a different job with still a lot of hernias, of course, and that's been exciting and fun. Within SAGES, I've actually got less of a role with the communications committee, which is now being chaired very ably by Kelly McFarland, and have moved on to some other roles within the governance task force, as well as with the executive committee.
And let's not forget your tenure as the president of the American Hernia Society. I think that kind of a big deal too. It's kind of a big deal.
Well, hernias are always a big deal.
They are always a big deal, but it's also a big deal to be president of a major society. So how was that? Did that finish, or you still got a little time, or when was the tenure?
Yeah, so that's still ongoing. It's going to be finishing in September with our annual meeting there, which we're very excited about. And I think that that society has been doing fabulous, a lot of exciting new projects, and of course our the new co-host that we're going to be introducing soon is probably going to have a lot to add to that society, as well as all of the great work we do there, as well as in SAGES.
And then when did you move to Southern California? When was that transition?
So it's been about a year and a half. There was definitely a time period where I might have been kind of living out of my car until my house was made. I know
as are many Californians, let's be honest.
Correct, but not to make it sound glib. There's definitely a problem with housing uncertainty in California.
Yeah.
That was not my issue. My issue was more brought on myself as we were waiting for our home to be renovated. And so it's exciting to be in a very small home now. But it's just me and my husband, so it's all good with the kids gone.
Yeah, I remember when we were talking in 2022, that was coming. The empty nester period was coming, and here it is.
So I know you have quite a while before you get there, but yeah, it is the best thing.
I am looking forward to it. I'm gonna have my kids mute the podcast during that comment, but that sounds fantastic. So. Well, thanks so much for that update. And with that, I'm going to hand off the privilege of the introduction of today's guest to you.
Okay, well, that's exciting. Thank you. So it is my distinct pleasure to introduce today's guest on SAGES Stories, Dr. Jenny Shao. Despite being one of our younger guests, Jenny is a definition of a rising star, not only within SAGES, but the entire field of surgery, and as I mentioned, also within America's Hernia Society. She received her undergraduate degree with honors no less in molecular biology and biochemistry from WashU in St. Louis. She then went on to get her medical degree from Indiana University School of Medicine in 2014, and a year that makes me feel very old. After that, she completed yeah, no kidding. So after medical school, she completed a residency in general surgery from MedStar Georgetown University Hospital in Washington, D.C., followed by a fellowship in advanced GI and minimally invasive surgery at Atrium Health at Carolinas Medical Center in Charlotte, North Carolina in 2020. So she's currently a clinical assistant professor in the Division of Minimally Invasive Surgery at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and also serves as the director of the Comprehensive Abdominal Wall Program and the vice chair of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. So obviously a lot on her plate. So we can't wait to hear your story, Jenny.
Thank you guys so much for having me. It's such an honor to be here. I really have a very healthy dose of imposter syndrome right now. I was looking at the guest list, and of course, I've listened to SAGES Stories. So to be here among all the greats is truly an honor. So thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you for being on our show. And as we will learn later, there's some exciting news about your involvement with the podcast. But before we officially break that news, we always like to hear a little bit about our guests in their own words. So where did you grow up, and what were some important, impactful steps along your journey in surgery so far?
So I actually was born in China. So I'm actually a first generation immigrant. So I moved here when I was 5 years old. And the reason we moved here is because my dad, who's a neurologist in China, he decided, to give me bigger, better opportunities. And so when he came here, I'm really proud of him for doing all of this, but he actually retook all of his USMLEs and STEP scores and redid his residency. And he's currently a physician now. So I think growing up, he was definitely a big inspiration. And being like a true millennial, I feel like I really believed in that American dream and that ideal where when you grow up, people tell you you can be anything that you want to be. And at the beginning, I think I wanted to be an astronaut, so it wasn't always surgery. But as
you could have done both. It's SAGES 20, right? A couple of years ago, we had both at this, so it's never too late.
No, it's never too late. Actually, I think there is like a surgeon astronaut that I recently heard about. So yes, definitely can still happen, maybe. But as I went to college, I really felt this desire to help people make a difference in the world, very true to my, I think, idealistic personality a little bit. And so that's when I decided to go to medical school. And at first, I didn't always really gravitate towards surgery. I think there's a lot of people who probably have a similar story where I didn't always know I wanted to be a surgeon. But as soon as I did my surgery rotation, I started on cardiothoracic surgery. I think the first surgery I ever scrubbed into was a 12-hour aortic aneurysm repair. And after that, I was hooked. I was like, this is it. I thought I was going to be a CT surgeon for, maybe 1 to 2 years, my brief medical career at that point. And then really just fell in love with minimally invasive surgery. I think one of the things that I really, really love about our specialty and our field are not only the people, but also the spirit of innovation, the spirit of always wanting to do something new and to try new things. And I really just fell in love with it. And of course, I'm a hernia surgeon as well. And so that's definitely one of my clinical passions in this field.
It's like I can't be alone without a hernia surgeon. It's like I have like adult supervision when I have a hernia surgeon.
That's our role.
I think it's a prerequisite
just,
for this.
It's a prerequisite. I need some hernia influence to keep me in line, I think is basically what it boils down to.
Absolutely. And Jenny, what an inspiring story from the standpoint of your dad. And I think that when talking about the astronaut and surgeons in space, the only thing that keeps coming to my mind is honestly from the Muppets. Pigs in space. And I honestly think that we should have a Sages in Space session, right? Like we've had a few different things in terms of surgery in space, but I think it should be themed along the Muppets Pigs in Space.
Oh yeah.
An idea
absolutely.
for like
that would be really fun.
Program chairs.
I like that.
I feel like there could be a lot of people who could be into that. So we'll have to float that out there for sure.
So you've told us a little bit about your clinical interests in terms of, just being a true connoisseur and expert in ab wall, but tell us a little bit more about your clinical and academic interests.
Yeah, so first and foremost, even though I think my practice mostly focuses on complex abdominal wall reconstruction, I really do think of myself as a minimally invasive general surgeon. I do a lot of general surgery. So I don't feel like I always talk about that aspect of my job, but I also see people for clinical diseases that are not exactly hernia. So on occasion, I'll take out some spleens. On occasion, I'll take out some gallbladders. And so I just love this kind of clinical variety. And of course, I do take general surgery call. So every once in a while, I'll be doing a perforated diverticulitis case in the middle of the night. So it kind of varies a little bit, but what I really truly love about complex abdominal wall reconstruction is I feel like there's so much creativity. I feel like no one hernia is the same depending on the patient factors, the patient anatomy, and the hernia characteristics. And I feel like it's always a complex problem that you get to solve. So I'm really happy that I found this field in this niche. And one of the things that I love about the specialty is I feel like we're constantly making progress. Even the last 5 to 10 years, I think some of the ways that we fix hernias now didn't really exist 10 years ago. And I find that really exciting. And so hopefully I can continue to contribute to that field and innovate in that space.
And what about some of your research interests? Because that seems to be also fairly significant part of your CV and your practice so far.
Yeah, so I feel like I do a lot of clinical hernia research. So here at the University of Michigan, I'm involved with our healthcare outcomes collaborative, along with Dana Tellum and Annie Ellers and Sean O'Neill, some of my really amazing colleagues. So we've been involved in a lot of Michigan state-based registry-wide population-based hernia registry data, which I think is really exciting. I think Dana talked a lot about it in her podcast, so I'm not going to elaborate on that too much more. I think one of the other clinical academic interests I have, or actually I should say non-clinical academic interests I have, is really within the space of DEI. So I think being involved in SAGES has led to some opportunities that has allowed me to explore that aspect of the things that I'm passionate about and what I want to do. And so lately I've been doing a lot of implementation research around how do you actually teach diversity, equity, inclusion? How do you think about behavior change and what are the things that you can do to actually make an impact in that space. I think what's really interesting is that as surgeons, for the longest time, we do the science so well, but we don't really know a lot about the world of DEI and that sort of research space, because I think it involves a lot of psychology and there's a lot of cross-disciplinary ideas that we have to sort of take in. And I think I'm learning so much, and I wouldn't call myself an expert by any means, but it's really become an area of clinical or academic passion for me. And so I'm really excited to be involved in some of those things.
Great. So, what about your interests outside of surgery?
So I would love to say that I have a lot, but I feel like I transitioned from being a resident, a fellow where you have no time, to, a really junior attending, trying to build my career. And now that I have a 14-month-old, I feel like finding hobbies outside of surgery has been really challenging, as I'm sure many other people listening to this will probably also relate to that. And so I think honestly, my biggest hobby, or the things that I really try to do, is just to spend time with the people I really care about. And so I think we can really be doing anything, but that's probably what I try to focus the most on in my life outside of surgery. So I always try to spend time with my husband, my baby, obviously my parents, and my husband's family. We're all really close knit, and of course, all my other amazing surgery friends and non-surgical friends. Um, I I feel like everywhere along my journey, I've always been so impressed by the people that I've surrounded myself with, including the people at SAGES. And I think that's really what drives my passion and what motivates me. And I think you just have to find, what makes you happy and what makes you want to thrive in this space. And definitely people for me is a big motivator.
So I feel like I've been fortunate enough to hang out with your toddler a bit. And I'm amazed with how you bring him to so many places. Tell us a little bit about how you make that work, because I think there's a lot of people who've got young children and are always like trying to figure out how do I integrate my family and my kids with the rest of what I do outside of just direct going to work and coming home.
I definitely think it's been a challenge. And I will say, Nico, my baby, loves you, because I think the last time he saw you, you were giving him chocolate mousse.
Yes.
So he did go to sleep after that, but he loved it because as like my husband, he's a true chocolate connoisseur and he doesn't get it very often. So I think you had a very good impression on him. But I think that goes along with what I was trying to say is I think, for so long in surgery, maybe we've had these more formal rules and regulations. And I think since COVID, things have been a little bit different. I think it's more accepted now that you can bring your family with you to conferences. You can integrate your family into a part of your surgery life so that they can continue to be there to support you, but also so you can share that really important part of yourself with them. And so I'm just really lucky that I have a super amazing supportive husband and family. And I also really want to teach Nico that um, you can have a really strong female surgeon who's your mom and to do everything. So I want him growing up to think that he can do and be whoever he wants to be, and that maybe the traditional gender norms don't necessarily have to apply. And so I love bringing him along. It is a little challenging, I will admit, because the last time we were all traveling together, we were in Prague and there was a lot of cobblestones. So he definitely got carried.
Yeah.
So the stroller
Yeah.
didn't work very well. He got
Yeah.
carried a lot.
Yeah.
But it was a great experience. I wouldn't trade it for the world. I think he really enjoyed getting to explore and to see all of those things. And hopefully I can get to continue to do that. I'm sure it'll be harder if we have more kids, but at least with one right now, it's somewhat manageable.
I really think that's super important. And I've definitely seen more of the stroller than Nico, but that's probably better for him that he was getting to hang out more with Archana instead of so. But it was hard to do that. But once my kids got a little bit older, I felt like even with more than one, like I was able to bring one meeting, and I tried to do that at least for the period of time when they weren't so involved in in their school, like, because that's the other thing, that it becomes less like your ability to take them and more their ability to actually join you, because they'll start getting busy. But I think, for those who are listening, to just hear of an example of someone who's tried to integrate that is super inspiring, and it may encourage them to say, hey, for this next meeting, like, let me try to bring them along. And I mean, let's be honest. I mean, there's certain aspects of a meeting that you definitely want to be at, and then there's probably certain aspects where you just rather be, you know, taking some time away from being in the hospital, for example, and just exploring the city. For example, what's in Cleveland? I mean, there were people all wanting to go all over the city, and I had to tell them where to go, and it just became exhausting because people wanted to see so many things here.
I had a great time in Cleveland.
Yeah,
It was
good,
great.
good. Yeah, Sharon will say there's a drinking game every time Kevin says Cleveland, so you got to take a shot. So you've been very involved very early, but I do like to hear how our guests got initially introduced to SAGES, and then how did you sort of pick up more responsibilities? And maybe you can talk to us a little bit about the development of the FLD program, the Fundamentals of Leadership Development.
Uh, yeah, I would love to. So I think I mentioned that at one point in my life, I maybe thought I was going to be a cardiothoracic or vascular surgeon. But really, like my third year of residency, I got so much more experience with minimally invasive surgery. And I really have to credit my residency program, because I think I didn't realize it at the time, but now that I've been out in the world for a little bit longer, I realized that most of my attendings that I trained with, even though they weren't technically all minimally invasive surgeons, they did everything minimally invasively, everyone from thoracic surgery to colorectal, to general surgery. And it felt like it was just the norm. And I didn't realize how special that was until that's what I decided to do. But like I mentioned, what I think I really loved about it, and even about vascular surgery, was just that spirit of innovation, of using technology and applying it to change how you can potentially treat a patient and fix their disease process. And so once I realized that this was the fellowship I was going to apply for, I actually went to my program director, Dr. Patrick Jackson at the time, and then my other residency mentor, Dr. Progmano, and I asked them, I was like, well, what should I do? Like, how do I match into, a fellowship, and who should I meet? Like, what society should I do? Like, what kind of research should I get involved with? And that's how I first learned about SAGES. So very quickly, I was submitting abstracts to SAGES, and the first meeting I went to was 2018 in Seattle. And I think it's really funny when I think back on that experience now, because when you show up as a resident, you feel a little out of place, maybe like very bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. Everyone's like, you're very awestruck to meet everybody. And I think that was the year I went to my first sing off. And I think because this was pre-pandemic, I think our East Asian colleagues put on quite a show. There were many costumes involved. And I was like, wow, this can't be a surgical society. And I think everyone has a similar story. But I think what really hooked me about SAGES was just the people and how welcoming everyone was. And it was definitely a very memorable meeting. And so, of course, I've been to every SAGES meeting since, except for the pandemic, which I think everybody was virtual. And so, yeah, it's been really great. And honestly, I think SAGES has really set me up for success in my clinical life as well. And so I signed up for the We Are SAGES, or the Diversity Leadership Professional Development, or DLPD committee, when I was probably a first year attending, so not that many years ago. And when I first got involved in the society, we were talking about applying for an ACS grant. And so um, Julianne Binginger Casey and I went ahead, applied for the ACS grant, and we got it. And our whole idea was Fundamentals of Leadership Development, or FLD. And that's really, in some ways, really launched my career within SAGES. I think it's really given me a project that I'm passionate about, and that I'm really continued so happy to be continually involved in. And so really the whole idea behind the curriculum was to develop and integrate diversity and inclusive excellence concepts into leadership skills that we feel like every surgical leader probably needs to have in order to be successful in this current climate, I guess, depending on who you talk to. But it was a really great project, and I think it's really allowed us to develop this product that then people can take and learn from. And so I'm really, really proud of it. And because of that, we've also gotten to do a little bit of implementation research to really assess, well, how do we really teach people some of these concepts? How can we implement behavior change or affect, outcomes later on with a curriculum like this? And so I feel like I learned a lot doing this project, probably definitely made some mistakes, but it's come a long way. And I'm really excited to say that I think in the next iterations, we're going to hopefully try to scale and disseminate it outside of SAGES. So stay tuned. I'll keep you updated on how it goes.
Well, fabulous. So that you commenting on the sing-off is a great segue to our next portion. So Kevin and Sharon and pretty much everybody else knows how much I love the song that accompanies the next segment, which is the We Are the Sages segment.
We are the sages. Sing it, everybody. We are the ones who make it bright our day, so let's start treating. Have you had a good time tonight? There's a choice we make. We got a lot more coming. We are good dancing, singing. Lives. It's true. Let's give a big hand for Sages Party. Give them a big hand.
Please don't play the song. Please don't play the song. Please don't play the song.
Actually, I've been meaning to ask, who is actually the person who is singing that segment? I've been trying to figure it out for a while and I can't ever figure it out. Are we allowed to tell people?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Who is it, Archana?
What?
Who when they play that segment?
Yeah.
You know who it is?
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure that it is like, so this all started with the Japanese put the song together, right?
Right.
So I think was one of the recordings from one of the for the many, many years. They have always finished up the sing-off with the song.
But it's Rick Green who is doing the
is that right?
He's the one that says, "Come on, sing it now." That's Rick Green. So that's who the man behind the segment that we currently have is. Yes.
Okay. That was one of my burning questions.
It's your burning question. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm glad I asked.
Yeah. So he loved that segment when we played it because he knew he was about to hear himself.
That's great. So I have a lot of favorite Sages moments. Probably my favorite sing-off moment was in Denver just a couple years ago. And for the sing-off that year, we were at this, I don't want to say cowboy bar, but that's kind of what it felt like to me. So
it was a cowboy bar. It was definitely
it wasn't an accurate description.
Absolutely that.
Yeah, there was a riding bull and I mean everything. And you had to try to make it 8 seconds. I did not. I don't know. Archana, did you try that bull?
I didn't try it, but it was one of my most memorable times as well, because I stood there and I watched Dan Jones get on the bull and just do a slow side off the bull. Amazing, even before the bull started moving.
Yeah, that was a tough bull to stay on.
God,
I tried a couple times actually.
So yeah, and that kind of segues to my favorite moment, because earlier in the night, I had watched John Mellinger get on the bull and there was a video of it that got posted and I was like, oh yeah, so if John Mellinger can do the mechanical bull, then everyone can. And so I think one of my friends and I, who shall remain nameless, we decided to have a contest because there's 2 of them. And so we decided that the person who could stay on the longest would win. And of course I won. I don't actually know how long it was. I think there's a video of this somewhere out there. But it was just, I think, that spirit of being there with all your friends and hanging out and the fact that you can get silly and just have a good time. I think that's what Sages is all about. And so definitely one of my favorite Sages sing-offs.
That's awesome. That's a great story. I may have actually been in line watching this. This kind of is ringing a bell, seeing seeing some surgeons trying to beat each other in the bull riding competition.
I know, we're so competitive. It's terrible.
Oh my gosh. Just surgeons though, just surgeons. Well, that's a great story, and your story's been awesome to hear. And I think it's probably a reasonable time for us to share some exciting news that we both alluded to earlier. And I think after hearing even just part of your story, and know your story is much more detailed than that, but our listeners will agree that you're a pretty cool person, despite your significant interest in hernia. And since apparently I can't be alone, as mentioned, without a hernia surgeon, the communications committee has offered you the opportunity to step in as the new Sages Stories co-host. And I'm happy to report to everyone that you've heard this offer, thought about it for a little while, and accepted it, and will officially join me for episode 27. So congratulations, Jenny, on your appointment as the new Sages Stories co-host.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited. And honestly, I think it's going to be really fun. I've been obviously listening to Sage's stories, and I think you and Sharon have such a great time interviewing everybody. And it's going to be such a privilege, I think, to be able to share in that. I think I have some big shoes to fill. Sharon is such an amazing podcaster. So hopefully I can live up to her reputation and make her proud.
Well, it is exciting, and Kevin has been such a star, and I can't think of a better co-host to continue to grow the impact of this important podcast. And Jenny, we do have like a list of things that you're supposed to check on with Kevin as you co-host with him. If we don't trust non-hernia surgeons, we just don't.
I'll keep that in mind.
You are good judges of character. Let's put it that way.
It has to do with stitch length and things like that.
Yeah. Among other things, there's definitely some check-ins that they'll give you the rundown. Well, yeah, you do have some time to prepare for our next episode, which is going to be a big one, and I definitely encourage everybody to tune into that. We will be dropping that probably in about a month or so. But I figured we could give you the floor, so to speak, to start kind of getting your feet wet and asking some questions as we wind down this episode.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. So actually, one of the other things I've been having a burning desire to know since I've been listening to the Sages stories is I realized, Kevin, that we have never asked you any questions. And so I thought it'd be really fun to put you in the hot seat temporarily and have you introduce yourself as well. And so I noticed you start off each podcast by asking each guest the same question. So of course, it seems like a really natural place to begin. So can you tell us a little bit about where you're from, where you grew up, and what were some impactful steps along your journey in surgery so far?
Yeah, I mean it's funny getting that question because I've asked it so many times, and it's actually creates some anxiety and nerves in me because I also have a little imposter syndrome when I think of some of the people that we've had on. So I'm right there with you, Jenny. But I actually, despite talking so much about Cleveland, I actually grew up not in Cleveland, about an hour and a half south of here in a town called Boardman, Ohio. It's close to the larger city, Youngstown, Ohio. I was born to a Lebanese father and a Scottish mother, so hence the Gaelic first name and Arabic last name. My father is a surgeon. He's a foreign medical grad like your dad, and he likewise kind of came to America in the 70s during the Civil War of Lebanon, and kind of escaped that, and also repeated everything, did his USMLE, did all his training in France. He was already in his residency in France and kind of gave it all up, didn't speak English, came here, learned English. My first language was French because my mother and father were speaking French. And we moved here, and despite kind of definitely being different just by name, there weren't a lot of El-Hayeks running around in Boardman, Ohio. My childhood, I would say, was very Stranger Things-esque in the 80s, minus Vecna, of course, and some of the bad things about Stranger Things and Upside Down. But I mean, I was always outside. I was always exploring. I had friends. We ride our bikes around. We lived very close to our school. We walked to our school and rode our bikes to the school. And I think we were given a lot of autonomy as kids. I had an older brother, and that led to a lot of trouble. Let's just put it that way. And some impactful stops along the way to being in medicine was, aside from the indirect impact that my father had, was, well, let's just say that there were many stops that involved consumption of medical and surgical care due to my my habits of just being quite reckless. So most of them were orthopedic in nature. So I required surgery at age 12 from a very significant fracture of my left arm. Then I broke my arm a couple other times. And so I initially had a strong kind of affinity toward orthopedics for that reason. And while I always enjoyed school, I also, we had a lot of, backyard athletics, football, basketball. And after experimenting with several different sports, it might be surprising to those who know me that I didn't really make it in basketball. I know that people, they see me, they see my stature and think that maybe basketball would have been a good fit, but it wasn't. Alas, being 5'4", just that wasn't gonna cut it. So I experimented with different sports, but I really found my home with wrestling. And so I started wrestling in 8th grade, and it became really an important part of my journey. And there were a lot of principles in wrestling, discipline, self-deprivation, the effort outcome curve. These are all things that led me to ultimately follow in my father's footsteps and go into medicine. And I made that decision when I was a sophomore. I did wrestle through college, and I had to make a decision. Was I gonna jump into this thing? But I decided then that that I was gonna do that and go into medicine. So I did have a fairly open mind in medical school regarding the field that I wanted to do. And I was actually part of something called the primary care track at Case Western Reserve University. And it was just a track where you kind of got linked in with a longitudinal physician. Mine happened to be a family practice physician who had an interest in sports med, and that was why I chose him. And I think they disbanded the program. I think I broke the program, and a couple of others of us broke the program because so many of us, like, one went into like dermatology, another one went into like orthopedics. I went into general surgery. But it was during my 3rd year clerkships, like a lot of our guests, where just being in the OR, it was actually my gyn-onc rotation, where they were doing a big open case of ovarian cancer. And I just said, this is what I want to do. And so I ended up deciding on general surgery, and went into minimally invasive surgery, kind of did a MIS fellowship, followed by an HPB fellowship. And the rest is history from that regard. I stayed at the Cleveland Clinic for 13 years and made a couple moves before my current move to Metro Health, which is our county hospital here.
I love that. I think you're the first person I've ever heard comparing wrestling to surgery. So I really kind of love that analogy. But you know what I love about your stories, and even just like hearing how similar it is to mine, even though it's a little bit different in so many ways. And I think I've heard that from a lot of our guests. And one of the things that I absolutely love about this podcast is just knowing how similar sometimes we are, even though we come from really different backgrounds and maybe different really families. But that same quality is there in so many of our stories. And I think that's something that I really, really, really enjoy.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I completely agree. Like Jake Greenberg, great
Yeah.
example when he was on with Archana. I mean, like, music, similar, right? Like, and it's just this concept where you make this decision that you're going to delay the outcome, right? You're gonna put in this effort that doesn't, it's not gonna look pretty, right? Like when you first start on the piano, I mean, my kids played piano for a few years. I mean, it wasn't like filling the house with glorious sounds. It's quite, quite difficult at times, but it's just that effort, and you see this incremental improvement. And I do think that's a harder principle to teach these days. That people want, like, even with my kids, it's like, I went out for volleyball. I want to be the best at volleyball right away. I'm like, yeah, you gotta like skin your knees a little bit. You gotta jump for the ball. And I think a lot of that I've been trying. My wife and I've been trying to instill that, but it is definitely not the type of principle that most people, and I know I'm sounding like an old fogey now, but it's definitely something that is a challenge to share, especially with those who want to go into surgery, because it does you skin your knees when you do surgery. You deprive yourself of some years of your life that maybe your investment banker friends are enjoying the fruits of labor that's not as long as ours. It's a long journey.
Yeah, I think
get to those 10,000 hours in some fashion, right?
Yeah.
And we're still figuring out how that translates from what we used to do, which was not necessarily the best way to do things, right? I mean, we recognize that.
No, it
But
wasn't. And
it's, how can we get all of that, nowadays in probably a better fashion? I think education and education theories constantly evolve, and it's only a good thing.
Yeah, no doubt.
Well, so one of the other questions I really wanted to ask you was, now that you've been hosting the Sages Stories podcast for a couple of seasons, what have been some of your memorable experiences as the co-host of this podcast?
That's a great question. I think every time we finish an episode, you learn something very unique about each of the guests, and so there's something memorable about every single episode. And I think it's just hearing someone's story in their own words, right? I mean, I think you can read about someone. Obviously, we read what people write, and it's living legends. I mean, this is like a living legends in MIS, and frankly in surgery, when you see some of the people in these lineups, and they basically agree to hang out with us for an hour. And I'm feel super privileged for that. And I think it's a pretty special thing. And I just love getting to hear from people in their own words, like about their backgrounds, where they grew up. You learn so much about someone from their background. And I think just hearing their stories is fascinating. And so to pick one or two, I think every episode I could say, in this episode, this was the most memorable thing I learned. Like, Rory Pryor and her engineering background and working on cars, Jeff Ponsky, just, in I never knew he didn't do very well in school, let's say, like, right. Like, he didn't do well, and he had to have someone really kick him to get him in gear. And here's Jeff Ponsky, I mean, there's always something about each of our guests that is very unique, that I go back, and when I listen to them at the end, I go back and listen to them, and it's just really satisfying to see it kind of all come together. And so there's just so many memorable moments.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And even as a listener to Sage's stories, I definitely feel like I've been able to experience that too. And some that really stood out to me were George Bursey or Gerald Marks, when they talked about, the history of what it was like to be a surgery trainee, in the 50s. It just is such a different world than what we experience now. And just being able to hear that was just great. I mean, you see the pictures and you sort of know, but you don't actually know. So hearing it firsthand is really, really cool.
And Bursey, I mean, we went to his house, like that was pretty special. So that was one that was going to be hard to do over Zoom, right? I mean, he was 101, or he was 100 turning 101. And so Sharon and I flew into LA, we met at his house and just sat around a mic, and just getting to be with him, experience him, and just here, I mean, what a story. I mean, if nobody's read his autobiography that comes through SAGES, I mean, I give that out to our graduating chiefs and just be like, this is a story, right? Like, we have stories. This is a real story. I mean, this is not a first world story. This is like a really tough like journey of loss and grief, but really redemption and coming through and being a giant in surgery. And he's also about my height, so I like that too. We were on the we didn't have to go very far to put the microphone. So
Yeah. Well, I feel like our stories make us who we are, right? And so I think hopefully through these stories we can inspire other people. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm really excited to be hosting this with you in the future. So I guess I feel like I wouldn't be doing my job correctly if I didn't ask you about your favorite SAGES moment.
oh, so I gotta we are the SAGES moment too.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Maybe we can have Jason replay the song. We'll have to
play it
review
twice.
Play it twice.
We're gonna play it twice.
We are the SAGES. Sing it, everybody. Have you had a good time tonight? There's a choice we make. We got a lot more coming. We are dancing, singing. It's true. Let's give a big hand for SAGES Far East. Give them a big hand.
Twice in this episode.
There's no more singing, okay? It just got to stop.
Well, I'm going to take some liberty and say there are really three. When I think back, I think there are three very impactful SAGES moments for me. And the first one, it shouldn't be any surprise. And that was really launching SAGES Stories. I mean, basically, to give you a brief history, I got put on the communication committee. I asked to be put on the communication committee. We got to the new business section. Archana's leading it. And I had it written out, and I said, Archana, I think there's been a push toward societies having podcasts. AHPBA has had one, SSAT has one. There's some in GI societies, and a lot of them focus on kind of clinical aspects. But I really think we should start one with SAGES. And she was like, perfect, do it. And it was just such a great example of how things work in SAGES. She's like, all right, write it up, bring us a budget. What are you, how are you going to do it? You're going to need a co-host. I know who's your co-host, and you guys got to put it together. And I think just that launching that, like kind of getting to the culmination of launching that was my first of the three. The next is another example of SAGES, just how they really elevate people that probably don't think they deserve it, because that's how I feel. And it was the opportunity to lead the HPB Solid Organ Committee, following the footsteps of Horacio Aspan and Adnan Al-Saidi. I mean, to be able to have them sort of groom me and kind of pour into me. They don't really know me that well, right? I mean, we see each other twice a year, but just to really say, hey, we think you have some talent. Let's pour in. How can we help you? And really for them to hand that off to me was really a special moment. And then finally, just having everybody in Cleveland. It was actually quite emotional for me to share this town that I do love it. I love Cleveland with so many of my SAGES friends from around the country. I think it was just a truly special moment. And I don't know if it'll come back through Cleveland, but if it does, I'm sure that'll be special too. But I'll remember that came through here in a pretty impactful time in my life, and it was just really special.
Thanks for sharing that, Kevin. Well, hopefully I've got the hang of this. Maybe we'll be ready to hit the ground running for the next episode. Gonna have to do some homework and some more studying up, but I'm excited.
I don't think there's any doubt that the podcast has a very, very bright future with you as co-host. So I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight, and I look forward to working with you. And Archana, of course, I cannot thank you enough for stepping in as the first guest co-host. I know I was not gonna be able to do this alone, and I'm not sure I could have done it without you either.
Well, I think you give me too much credit, but thank you. I think that you guys have done such a great job already. I can see the great chemistry that you have, and I am looking forward to all the upcoming episodes with the two of you leading this.
Well, thank you both so much. I really had a great time tonight, and looking forward to many more amazing episodes.
And I hope to see all of you all soon. And for our listeners, I'm assuming this podcast drops fairly close to the deadline for the SAGES 2025 meeting, which will be in Southern California. So Archana doesn't have to fly. She'll have a drive to Long Beach, California. How far is that from you?
Well, it may not be that far, but it's going to take like an hour and a half to 2 hours regardless.
Yeah.
It's California.
15 miles, 2.5 hours. Yes.
Yeah, pretty much.
So Long Beach, California, March 12th to 15th, 2025. It's not too early to mark your calendars, and make sure to get those late breaking abstracts submitted. I will make a note to our podcast renderer to maybe drop this, let's say 4 to 5 days beforehand, so that it puts some pressure on our listeners. So thanks everyone, and we'll see you next time. And that wraps up today's episode of SAGES Stories. You can view the show notes for any links to sites we referenced today. Visit sages.org for membership information and for the most recent news from our society. Follow us on Twitter at @sages_updates. Make sure you hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. See you again next time, and remember, you can't spell minimally invasive surgery without SAGES.
Tonight. There's a choice we make. We got a lot more coming. Good dancing, singing. It's true. Let's give a big hand for SAGES Fari. Give him a big hand. We are the world. We are the world. We are the SAGES. We are the SAGES. We are the world who make a brighter day. So let's start treating. There's a choice we make. We are saving patients' lives. It's true, we make a better day, just you and me. One more time. We are the world. We are the SAGES. We are the ones who make a better day, so let's start reading. There's a choice we're making. We are saving patients' lives. It's true, we make a better day, just you and me. Thank you, SAGES Fari. Have a good time tonight. Band's coming back soon. Get something to drink. Enjoy the rest of Baltimore. We'll see you in Cleveland next year. We are saving patients' lives. It's true, we make a better day, just you and me. Everyone. Thank you, Barbara. We are the SAGES. We are the ones who make it better.